Most of us spend a lot of time looking outside of ourselves for answers that we're always going to have to come from within. Be your own fucking guru. That's what this series is about. I'm Ryan Paul McGuigan. This is Beneath the Noise. In this episode, I'm going into my version of the acute event that causes the ground to come away from underneath you, virtually or literally overnight. Rather than gradually shifting over years, there came a time when everything just converged and my life just totally shit itself. I'd been living with the background hum of wanting to leave Ireland for ages. The business I'd built for about 12 or 13 years at this stage was feeling more and more like an obligation rather than something I wanted to keep doing. And then into the bargain, the normal ups and downs of my relationship started to feel like more deeper problems in the foundations. I'd been with my partner for 9 years and we were engaged to be married. The whole thing was mapped out. We'd get married, get our ducks in a row, and move away somewhere to the sun and live happily ever after, no doubt. I hung on to that dream for as long as I could, but we finally had to admit that it just wasn't going to work. And I was sad about it, but I knew that it was for the best for both of us. We live 40 miles from Belfast, and it just made more sense if I moved back there to cut the commute. By this stage, I'd cut from 4 working days a week down to 3 to help manage the physical toll in my hands. That meant a reduced income. And what becomes really obvious to anyone who's had a breakup or is considering a breakup is that when you're in a relationship and there are 2 of you contributing to the household, that's manageable. When that changes, it has practical consequences pretty quickly. So the plan was to move back to Belfast to save the time and money on the commute, and on account of the affordability, to look for a shared house so that I could find my feet again, and then I'd reassess in a year's time. I needed somewhere to live pretty quickly. Things were amicable enough between us, but it just made sense to move sooner than later, if possible. I found what looked like a good option. A 4-bedroom house, nice kitchen and living room, ensuite bathroom, a mile from the office. The photos looked great. So because I'd already missed out on one place where I was waiting to arrange a viewing, I made a decision that I wouldn't normally make. And I signed the lease and paid the deposit without ever seeing it with my own eyes. The reality when I arrived with my bags wasn't in line with my expectations. The house itself was 100%, but what I didn't really account for was that it was in an area of Belfast that didn't feel entirely safe to me, that didn't feel like home. I remember standing in the street thinking, what the fuck have I just done? And I was stuck there. I'd signed the lease. I had a reduced income. There was no quick exit. That was it, for the next year at least. So that's the picture. Approaching 40, single, no mortgage, no car, no children, living in a shared house, somewhere that felt wrong in every direction I looked. Running a business that was taking far too much out of me, even at 3 days a week trying to protect my hands, which meant less money coming in than I needed to feel any kind of security. From the outside, the business still looked fine. The clients were still coming. The reviews were still 5-star. If I didn't tell them, nobody looking from the outside would have seen any of it. Inside, the scaffolding had come down. It was an absolute shit show. The thought that sat at the bottom of it all, the one I wouldn't have said out loud to anyone, was that I'd failed. Failed at life. It was supposed to look a certain way by a certain age. I'd absorbed those expectations at some point without ever consciously agreeing to them. But they were there. And by any measure, I was nowhere near where I was supposed to be. I felt the eyes and the judgments and the opinions of the world, even though most people didn't even know yet. This time the year before, I was still dreaming of getting married, moving to the sun, and everything looked amazing. There was everything to look forward to. And now, look at the state of things. The shame and the embarrassment of it was one thing, but underneath that was the fear and the anxiety The practical fear was very real and specific. With a reduced income, the prospect of ever getting out of that shared house felt distant, if not impossible. To move into my own place, I'd need to be earning more. To earn more, I needed to work more. To work more, I needed my hands to hold up, but my hands weren't holding up. And in the background of all that sat the questions going round and round. If I was stuck here, if this was the situation I was in, how was any of it going to change? How was I going to meet someone new? What could I even offer that person? Who the fuck was going to get involved in this mess? How was I going to start again, build something new from here? None of that thinking went anywhere good, but I couldn't stop it. The mind picked up the situation and just started running scenarios, mostly worst case scenarios. The overthinking that I described in the previous episodes as circling without landing, that was the texture of every day. Pretty much constantly, unless I was busy or otherwise distracted for a while. And the one thing that made it worse was that I couldn't tell anyone. Outside my nearest and dearest, I couldn't say any of this out loud. I was embarrassed at where I'd found myself. I knew the relationship wasn't going to work. I didn't want the relationship back, but the fracturing of that whole image I'd built, the version of myself I'd projected to the world, the future husband, and with the thriving business, who was planning on a move to the sun, that fracturing actually felt worse than the breakup itself, because I could see the breakup as something that just happens to people. And in my case, it was necessary and for the best, but I just couldn't bring myself to admit out loud that that image couldn't be further from the truth. And in fact, my life was a train wreck, and therefore I was a train wreck. So I did what I thought was the only option, and I performed. Every client who came through the door got the usual version of me: positive, enthusiastic, energetic, and I was convincing. The alternative was to say it out loud and probably break down into floods of tears. It just wasn't an option. But going home after those days and closing the door behind me and getting to drop the whole facade, that was such a relief. The performance was its own kind of exhaustion. Maintaining that gap between what was happening and what I was showing took energy that I just didn't have to spare. While all this was going on, I was doing what I imagine most people do in that situation. I was looking for a way to fix it. I'd already been journaling for years before any of this, so that was already there as a habit, but I leaned into it harder. Writing things out, processing on the page, trying to externalize what was running inside, sitting with the uncomfortable feelings, allowing myself, even making myself cry about it. I already consider myself pretty self-aware, and I knew that I shouldn't keep things bottled up, even if I wasn't ready to announce it to the world. And all of that helped. It genuinely helped. Things became clearer on paper than they were in my head. I could see it and tell myself that there were brighter days ahead. And that's probably what I would have said to someone else in my position. But those brighter days seemed a ways off. The same feelings were still there when I closed the notebook, and no amount of self-assurance lasted more than fleeting moments. I was also reading everything I could find: how to stop anxiety, how to have more confidence, reading through all the usual step-by-step guides, which all made sense on how or why they might work, but at the same time, didn't really work. I was building a pretty clear picture of the psychological landscape and an increasingly complete intellectual picture of what was happening to me and why. I could have written a fairly coherent analysis of my own situation, but I was still living with the shame, the embarrassment, the fear, and the anxiety. Eventually, I went to see a counsellor. He was good. I explained my situation fully and honestly, and it seemed easier to talk to him, a stranger. And he gave me a framework for what was happening, and I was able to label it clearly. This was a loss of identity. The relationship, the life that had been built around it, the image of who I was within it, that had been doing work that I hadn't realized it was doing. When all that went, the person underneath wasn't sure what was left. Turns out this is a common and even predictable thing that happens. I understood the mechanism. I understood why it had hit me the way it had. That was the first thing. I had actual language for the experience, and that mattered. There's something that shifts when you can finally name what's been happening to you. It's real, but again, the words didn't shift the experience. I understood that I was experiencing or suffering a loss of identity. I was still feeling like a failure, still carrying the shame, still lying awake wondering what the fuck I was going to do about it. I kept trying, I kept reading, I kept writing, I kept going to the sessions. I was doing everything I knew how to do, and I stayed stuck. Why that's the case and what it actually points to, that's the next episode. Thanks for listening to Beneath the Noise. If something in this landed for you, pass it on to someone you think could use it. And the next episode is there when you're ready.